first of all, Billy, I want to talk about people's history
Oh yeah.
because we've had the official biography. I think that was quite a while ago, but this is something quite different. Now, I have read quite a number of different iterations of people history books before, but for me, this is the best one that I've read because it's so comprehensive, but it's also got your perspective. What was it like reading many hundreds of memories of your life and work?
Well, I came away thinking this Billy Bragg is a lovely bloke. I'd love to meet him. He's a smashing geezer. He seems so nice to everybody. People come and see him and he talks to them and everything. It was a bit like that, elements of it. So I thought I'd better put a bit of myself in there just to leaven it up with some reality. Um, no, it was good fun, really. Obviously, myself and Richard Houghton and Ian Key, who was the editor, went through a lot of contributions and trying to put it into a narrative state. That was kind of fun as well. But yeah, it's sort of strange. You don't often get that perspective from the audience, how other people see you. So that was quite important.
Was there much that you didn't remember, or did it bring back particular memories?
It's weirder than that, Jason. There are bits that I remembered that friends of mine who were there, who wrote it up, remembered it completely differently. The thing happened. We both remembered the thing happened, but their version of it and my version of it was considerably different. And I thought about picking them up on it, and I thought, not really. That's their memory. That's the way they remember it. I'm going to leave it in there, the way they remembered it. But yeah, I think that's to do with memory, though, isn't it? Because we're talking about a gap of 30 or 40 years. So, of course, we all remember things a bit different. But yeah, there was one or two where I thought, oh, I wonder if my actual memories that I'm writing down are as accurate as they could be. Maybe some people will write in and say, "It never happened like that, Bill. You weren't even there, you idiot." I'll be like, "Oh, okay." So that was that was a bit strange.
Yeah, memory isn't like a video recorder. Not that
No,
I think that people use them these days. It works on a very, very different basis.
it
So,
is. It's like I think it's more like a a cliff face. Bits get worn off after time, fall in the sea, and it's the basic cliff is still there, but the bit that you actually walked on might not be there anymore. And I think memory as it kind of erodes over time, gently erodes over time.
the other aspect that was particularly touching for me was that towards the end of the book, you made a reflection about it kind of symbolizes the amount of support you had throughout your journey because no matter what you don't do things in isolation.
No. And I've been very fortunate in that there have been people out there who've been interested in what I'm doing and what I'm saying. Not everybody gets that opportunity to be able to um, have a career that carries on for decades. You know, there's a lot of artists that I knocked around with back in the day in the 1980s who were amazing songwriters, really talented. I've no idea where they are now. They're not doing gigs anymore. Whereas I'm still out here pottering around, annoying people, doing my thing, popping up on Question Time to shout reform MPs, that sort of stuff, which is what I was doing back in the day. So yeah, I don't take it for granted, Jason. I recognise it's a real privilege to do this. So on those days when I'm feeling a bit grumpy about what I've got to do today, oh bloody hell, not another bloody podcast. Jesus Christ. I'm like, no, just think how many people you know would love to be doing this. And I know a lot of people who would love to be doing this. So it helps keep me grounded.
This almost feels like a culmination because the last 2 to 3 years you've had the Roaring 40 compilation or compilations, given there's quite a few versions of it. So does it almost feel like this is kind of bookending and then you can clear the decks to do whatever you want to do for the next period?
Yeah, I mean that I think it's a very strange thing actually, Jason. I was thinking about this the other day. Since the pandemic, like a lot of people, I've got a different perspective on things and I'm approaching things differently. And I wonder, and this is just my theory, whether it's because of the pandemic or because I'm now in my 60s and I'm more like, I can't tear around like I used to, doing everything, getting involved in everything. I'm having to think a little bit more like, how do I use my energy in a way that is productive rather than just, okay, we'll do 4 tours this year because we've always done that, or we'll do a record next year because we've always done that. Is there another way of approaching it that's not just better use of energy, but more engaging for me as well? Because, something, making records is making records. You have to, if you've got a reason for making or a focus, or you're working with someone different, that makes it all the more interesting rather than just being in the studio cranking out songs, which I never was much of a studio person.
Yeah, that comes across clearly given the early albums. The other aspect that comes across for me is, as you'd expect, is the role of music, whether it's giving you a sense of confidence, identity, and then we can potentially talk later about it, but the sort of intersection with bringing people together and politics.
Yeah, music has the ability to do that. You know, that's why I was confident during the lockdowns that when it came back, people would still want to come to gigs again, because there's something you can get at gigs that you can't get online. That sense of being part of something bigger, that experience of, you know, your favorite singer singing your favorite song, and you're singing at the top of your voice, and so are 1,000 other people or 100 other people or whatever. And when you have that experience, you feel kind of, it's almost like an affirmation of your experience as an individual, that you're not alone, that you're part of a collective. And we don't get many opportunities to feel like that. Church is one, when you're in church and everyone's singing a hymn, or at football, when your team wins and everyone's happy, or they lose and everyone's sad. We don't have many opportunities, even less so, I think, with the in the age of the internet, to have those kind of collective experiences. So yeah, I think music does have that role to play in society.
In a way, it feels potentially even more important given that, I mean, with social media, which really came about 20 years ago with Facebook, the idea was that it would bring people together, making connections. But what it's actually done is the reverse, where people have gone into bubbles and they're kind of shouting at each other and
Yeah.
no one's listening.
Yeah, I mean, that is a real problem, I think. And also the aspect of social media that is most worrying is the anonymity allows people to say things online that they would never say face to face with someone. And I think that's been an unfortunate aspect of it, because it has, I mean, you know, it's not good or bad, social media. It's a mirror. It's a mirror to us all. It allows people to find one another, to converse, to discuss, to organize, but it also allows people to hate. It allows people to bully. It allows people to abuse. Life's like that, unfortunately. And what we'd all like, I think, is a social media where those kind of people are excluded. But unfortunately, I hate to say it, but the profit model for social media is based on attention, and outrage gets more attention than fluffy puppy dogs. Although there is a whole website just for looking at videos of fluffy puppy dogs, obviously. You know, we've all seen it.
Now, going back to the book, the early period where I think you've got your reflections of your teenage years, but then you've got Wiggy and his role. It takes me there to you guys listening to the Faces, and then the early period of you guys writing songs.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I thought of, I've read a few of Spenwood is the publisher. Richard Houghton puts these books together. I read his Faces book, which was good. I really enjoyed reading that. A fan memories book. He's had a Clash one recently. Ian Key edited that, but I thought it would be more interesting to hear from other people who were there with me at the time. So people that were mates of mine, who were co-workers, who collaborated with me. So rather than start it from the beginnings of Billy Bragg, I thought we would start it right from the beginning of learning to play the guitar. And of course, that involved the kid next door, Wiggy, teaching me how to play the Rod Stewart songbook. So yeah, that was, you know, that was really fun reflecting on that with him, with Ricey, John Waugh as well, the bass player in Riff Raff, talking to them and convincing them to write something for me. It was nice to sort of reconnect with those days.
Some interesting stories. There's that moment where you ended up seeing an advert for an amplifier in the back of the Melody Maker. Turns out that it was originally owned by Ronnie
Ronnie
Lane.
Lane, yeah, he was the bass player in the Faces. Yeah, it was his guitar amplifier, and that just for us was just an incredible experience because we were huge fans of the Faces. So yeah, getting on the district line and going all the way to Richmond from Barking, which is the other end of the district line, finding this amp, it was a huge thing. It weighed a ton. Carrying it home on the district line, and then as we always did when we had a kind of like watershed experience, getting it into the photo booth at Barking Station and taking a photo of us. I think it's in the book. I think we put the photos in the book. Yeah, of us with the amp. It was like it was almost being like touched by the hand of God, having something that belonged to one of the faces and Wiggy playing through that. It was an amazing experience.
And that formative moment for your first major band, Riff Raff, where you ended up decamping to this farmhouse to rehearse and basically being almost being part of the family.
Yeah, it was lovely. It was in East Northamptonshire, near a town called Oundle, and we'd never been up at that part of the world before. And again, there was a Ronnie Lane connection because the guy who ran the studio with his wife, Ruan O'Loughlin and Jackie, Ruan had played saxophone in one of the lineups of my favourite lineup, actually, of Slim Chance, Ronnie Lane's band. And Jackie had designed the sleeve. It was her handwriting on the sleeve of the record, which was just blew our little minds. But the important thing about the O'Loughlins were that they were the first people to take us seriously as musicians. Whilst our parents were very understanding, but kind of just thought it was a hobby, the O'Loughlins were like, yeah, this is brilliant. You can do this. And they gave us a gig at the end of the week. We opened for Ruin's band in a pub in a place called Earthlingborough, which is probably, as you know, where the Earthlings come from. That was just an amazing experience. And we never really came home from that. That was it, really.
Yeah, there's like a 5 or 6 year period when you read the different entries and then different perspective by friends and then increasingly fans. You do get that sense of excitement as you move on from one period to the other. You get setbacks, the split of Riff Raff, and then the
Yeah.
start of your solo career, and then the stories. You really do get that sense of things are really happening and building here.
Yeah, well, that's the way it is. I mean, nothing happens in a straight line. You know, a couple of times I had to go back to my mum's house and go back to that damp box room that I grew up in, where the window didn't shut properly. And there was every chance that would happen again. I'll be perfectly honest with you. When I got my first big paycheck from Life's a Riot with Spy versus Spy, when I say big, I mean like 500 quid. I spent that money on installing central heating in my mum's house because I knew that if everything went tits up again, I'd have to go back to that box room. And at least there would be a radiator in the room. It wouldn't be as cold and damp as it was. And I'd have something. You know, if you buy electric guitars or an Aston Martin, you sell that when it gets tough. But I couldn't sell my mum's central heating. And my nephew lives there now. My mum passed away years ago. But my nephew lives in that house now, and they've still got that same central heating. I'm very proud of that.
Just as an example of some of the fantastic stories in the book, give us a whistle stop tour through you being at Charisma's reception and trying to get in touch with, I think, Peter Jenner.
Yeah.
But actually, you managed to get your way in due to the fact they were calling out for the video recorder installer.
Yeah. This is a long, long time ago, probably before you were born, Jason, when video recorders were new and people didn't really know how to tune one into their TV. They needed a technician to come and do it. But I've been working with Wiggy, who, along with Jackie O'Loughlin, had been making audio-visual presentations for companies. And we took a video player with us to demonstrate it, and I would hook it up while he did the chat. So I kind of knew how to hook up a video. So I'm sitting in the reception at Charisma Records with my cassette, hoping to see this guy named Peter Jenner. And this is an experience I'd had several times where they'd say, I'm afraid you can't come down. We want to leave your cassette, and you never hear anything again. When someone stuck their head round the door and said to me, I was sitting there, you the guy who's come to tune in a video? And I said, yeah, which was in part a lie, but that lie was mitigated by the fact that I did indeed tune in their video so they could record the first edition of The Tube, which had Peter Gabriel, one of their artists, on it. And while we're all standing around watching it and making sure it worked, all the company people, I said to this woman, this secretary woman who got me in, is Peter Jenner here? And she said, yeah, that's him over there. So I sidled up to him and gave him my cassette. And the rest is history. He signed me up for Life's a Riot with Spy versus Spy. And when Richard Branson bought Charisma Records and we all got chucked out, he became my manager.
And there are other figures there that you meet along the way, like Andy Kershaw?
Kershaw, yeah, he was a DJ in Radio Air in Leeds. And I picked my record out of the junk box. Nobody else wanted to play it. He played it, really liked it, and got in touch and said, next time you're passing through, come and keep on my floor. And that was how I met him. And then he, in turn, got fired for playing my records and other people's records, like The Fall and people like that. And so I said, well, come down to London, and I need a driver. I can't drive. So come down and work with me and be a roadie. And he come work with me, and ended up, when we did Top of the Pops, they recognised what a great talent he had. And and filched him for the old grey whistle test. And yeah, there he was gone.
And like pretty much everybody of your generation, you were listening nightly to John Peel. But then I think there was a moment where he made a joke about needing a mushroom biryani.
That's true. That's very true. And it was the day I'd left my album at reception for him. I heard him say that on the radio, and by chance, I was in the vicinity of Broadcasting House. So I hurried down to Broadcasting House with mushroom biryani. This was the old days at the BBC where they had a concierge in a peak cap and a big coat. So I got a mushroom biryani for John Peel. And he picked up the phone and said, "John, your mushroom biryani's here." And blow me, Peel came down the stairs to take it off me personally. And I was able to say to him, "My name's Billy Bragg. I left this record. Would you ever listen to it?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, sure. Nice one. Thanks." And off he went. And that night he played the first track, side one of Milk and Human Kindness of Life's a Riot. And very kindly said, "I would have played it even without the mushroom biryani," which is very kind of him to say that.
Was it Charisma that they were bought out by Virgin and then cast away Peter, and then you were able to get the rights and then
That's
over to
right.
Go Discs?
Yeah, they did. I mean, I was only signed for one album anyway. It's not like they had me a lifetime. I mean, nobody thought it was going to do anything. So I didn't get an advance. I had a publishing deal with Chapel Music through a guy named Jeff Chegwin, lovely guy. And he said that, I could record the record in their demo studio and he would supply the tape free to Peter Jenner for the release. So everyone took a punt. Nobody, I think they pressed 5,000 copies and left it to me to do the promo, see what happens. I was very fortunate in it, connected with a lot of people, and was the kind of making of me for that in that sense. All very kind of DIY. That's part of the punk ethic as far as I'm concerned, the do-it-yourself idea. Don't wait around for someone to ask you to do it. Get out there and do it yourself.
Because when you were recording Life's a Riot, I mean, it's just recorded in a few days, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was in the demo studio at Chapel Music. It was just really me playing. It was my live set. I just played the songs over and over and over till we got one we liked. And even then, some of them I'd never quite got. New songs I'd just written, I just couldn't get them right. So that was handy because I had them on my second album. But yeah, it ended up just being 7 tracks and everyone decided that sounded all right. And I got away with it.
And then A People's History also describes, by early 1984, a bit of Bragg mania. So you really started getting quite popular.
We did. The first instance of Bragg mania was actually at a gig in Hastings, the name of which I think it might have been called The Cellar. It certainly was a cellar. And it had a low stage. The stage was probably only about 2 foot high. And there were so many people in there, people kept falling up the stage. So that was weird in the first case. And then behind the stage, at the back of literally a door on the stage went into a wine cellar, which was the dressing room, which was a bit, sort of damp and horrible, but that's what it was. And so I went in there to sort of rub myself down with a copy of the Socialist Worker and have a quick cheap beer before springing back on stage for the encore. And as I came to come back on the stage, the door handle came off in my hand. And now everybody outside is screaming Bragg mania, loud, loud, loud. I'm banging on, like Fred Flintstone, banging on the door, trying to get someone to hear me. And I'm like, I'm looking for something like a crowbar or something. I can open the door. Eventually, Kershaw flings open the door. Says, "Are you coming back or not?" I'm like, show him the handle. I'm like, "Mate." So yeah, that was kind of, that was when it all got a bit mad. And from then on, I had the opportunity to play all over the country.
And it's quite a contrast. I mean, there was only a few acts, like maybe you guys and the Smiths and a few others, that kind of didn't go to the sort of new romantic dressing up aspect. And there's some great footage of you playing Between the Wars with just you and the guitar. But then I watched it back, and Steve Wright, I don't know if it's a compliment or not, but he basically said that he had to listen to it 3 times to understand it. And that was part of his intro to you.
Yeah. Well, he did ask me about it. I mean, that's the thing that was really interesting. The thing about Wright, he was that kind of like, zood guy, but he realized the song was important and that me playing it solo was important to me too. And he went out of his way to make me feel part of it. He asked me about it. I explained it to him. He came back and asked me again. I explained it to him again. And so I think that was his way of saying, This is something different from what is normally here. And he really made me feel part of Top of the Pops. It was a completely alien experience to me, obviously. And I was playing live, which not many other people do. But, you know, it was really what I was doing every night. So it wasn't onerous, but they had, it was the time when Top of the Pops didn't trust the audience anymore. So they had a kind of employed audience who danced, and they were asked, the producer or the director came and had a word with them beforehand about what he wanted them to do. And when he went away, I went to the front of the stage and just said to him, look, I'm playing this live, right? I'm actually doing this proper live. So whatever you do, don't go mad. Show me a bit of respect here. I'm trying to concentrate. And they were really good about it. They just kind of swayed gently. It was nice. They were cool. Everyone was cool. I think that came across.
And the other aspect is that to many outsiders, they associate you with the kind of political edge, but your songs about relationships and kind of life in general just come out just as strong, if not more, whether it's Saturday Boy or later on Brickbat.
Yeah. Well, I'm just trying to make sense of the world. It's a confusing world out there, Jason. And music has a way of offering people some empathy for their situation. And it does that by making you feel as if you're not the only person who's ever felt this way. Now, whether that's about heartbreak or about politics or about anything or about the weather or about your relationship with your mum and dad, whatever, music is really all about making people feel that they're not alone. And even dance music, you know, if there's a song with a really incredibly hooky song that lifts you up and just makes you want to dance and go crazy, and you go to a club and they put it on and everyone goes crazy, you're like, yeah, I'm not alone. I'm not the only person who feels this way. And again, that's a really valuable thing to be able to do if your emotions are attuned to that kind of experience. You can change your mood without having to put horrible chemicals in your system. So yeah, whether I'm writing about love or whether I'm writing about politics or whatever, I'm trying to make people feel like I understand where they're coming from by examples in my own experience. Yeah, I've done this too, because that's what great music does for me. Those songs that made me feel like I'm not alone, and that's the kind of target you're aiming for. I'm not saying I hit it every time. In some ways, it's a bit like taking a free kick. Sometimes the ball goes over the wall into the top right-hand corner. Sometimes it hits the woodwork. Sometimes it goes over the top of the stand. But all the time you're trying to get it, if you excuse the metaphor, you're trying to get it in the goal. And when it does, you know, because the way people respond is more than just, I like your song, mate. It's something much deeper.
Did you get that kinship and camaraderie when there's a period 84, 85 when it mentions about you did some support slots in the States, whether it's the Smiths and also you did a support Echo and the Bunnymen?
Yeah, there was a lot of kinship in that because we were, I think maybe it was the Bunnymen's second tour. It might have been the Smiths' first proper tour as well. So we were all kind of new to it. We were all like, wow, this is incredible, isn't it? We were all running around, having grown up with American pop culture. To actually be there was incredibly eye-opening. I mean, that American tour with the Bunnymen, the first time I went to the United States of America, there are places we visited on that tour that I've never been able to find again. You know, they were so vivid in my memory because of that first trip. It may be those places aren't even there anymore because it's a long time ago now. It's over 40 years. But yeah, there are bits of that tour. And it was such a comprehensive tour as well, north, south, east, west, everywhere. And to be able to do it with Wiggy was actually special as well because Kershaw couldn't come because of work commitments. So I rang Wiggy and said, mate, you've got to come because this might be the only time I ever go to America. And it's not going to be the same sending you postcards about it. I want you to be and experience it with me. Come on. And I'll pay you. And so, yeah. So me and him got to do it together. All those things we dreamed about when we were teenagers. We got to tour America together. And it was the last thing of the things we promised ourselves we would do. I ticked off. Make an album, be on the cover of the NME, tour America. Everything since then, really, has been kind of icing on the cake, weirdly.
And the time as well, the political context of post 1983, Falklands, Thatcher's dominance, the miners' strike, and then the Red Wedge era as well. What was the reason you got involved in Red Wedge?
Well, it's down to the miners' strike, really. I think what happened in 1984 was that obviously the miners' strike began, and it seemed, I mean, I already was, I had politics in my music. If you listen to the first album, there's politics there, but it's pretty sort of wide. Just because you're better than me doesn't mean I'm lazy. Just because you're going forwards doesn't mean I'm going backwards politics. But the miners' strike was something different, and it seemed to me to be a war on my class. You know, I come from a East London borough, big working class borough, car factory. That's what I was educated to do. And it seemed like to me it was a class war. So I really immediately felt a support for the miners. And then there I was, a solo singer-songwriter at a time of great social confrontation. And I'd grown up listening to mostly American singer-songwriters who had lived through the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War. Everyone from Bob Dylan onwards had been that sole focus on stage singing their political songs. And I suddenly thought, well, this is who I am. I am this guy. I really need to get involved with this. This is something that not only I feel like I understand, but I have an opportunity here to find out whether or not music can actually change the world if I go out and do this stuff. So I started doing gigs with the miners, and the miners' strike, there were people out there saying that who knew more about politics than I did, because I didn't really know a huge amount about Marxism and stuff like that. I hadn't studied politics in that sense. My sort of socialism came more from a compassionate, more humanistic ideology. Or not even an ideology, really, a sentiment. But there were people who knew more about politics than me who said this was a revolutionary moment, that we were going to bring down the Thatcher government. Now, your listeners should know that in 1974, a Tory government in the UK, the government of Edward Heath, was brought down by a miners' strike. So it had happened before. And in some ways, what Thatcher was doing was revenge for that miners' strike. So it was a possibility, and I believed it would happen. I believed we were going to bring down the Tory government. But when that didn't happen, and the strike ended in defeat, then those artists who had supported the miners, I thought, well, what do we do now? Do we just go back to being in smash hits? Is that it? Is it all over? Or is there another way to defeat Margaret Thatcher? And the most obvious way to do that will be the 1987 general election, the next election after the miners' strike. And the only vehicle possible for doing that was the Labour Party. And many of us who'd done gigs for the miners had been on platforms with Labour Party activists. So we were all kind of, on side, if you like, with the Labour Party, if not supportive. So Red Wedge came out of that, really. But the key thing about it is what bound us together was not membership of the Labour Party or support for the Labour Party. It was wanting to oppose the government of Margaret Thatcher. And that's the glue that held us together. And really, the Labour Party was the only movement possible, working with the unions, that were actually going to be able to bring her down. And it didn't happen. But I pushed the idea of music changing the world as far as I physically could. I did as much as I could, put my neck on the line, along with other comrades, to see if we could actually do something here. And we didn't. So, I would do it again if the time came again. I stand by what I did. I learned a lot from it. It made me understand that music can't change the world, but it can make you believe the world can be changed, which is an important thing in and of itself. And I think it's better for me to work from that premise that what I'm doing is encouraging people to believe the world can be changed, rather than imagining I'm some kind of messiah figure who's going to change the world for everyone if they buy enough of my records. I never liked and never felt comfortable with that idea. And it wasn't borne out by the facts.
Two songs, Waiting for the Great Leap Forwards and Mid-Century Modern.
Yeah.
Are they kind of your reflections then and now?
Yeah, I think after Red Wedge ended, there were a lot of us felt, so we need to step away from this for a moment. And I think that's why the album with Great Leap Forwards on it is really an album of love songs, a workers' playtime. And it's in the title, Workers' Play. I'm stepping away from it here. And I also went through a cataclysmic love affair as well, shortly or during and after Red Wedge. So that kind of added to the sense of kind of the world turned upside down. But I felt I needed to make a statement whereby I made it clear to my listeners that I understood that music can't change the world. I recognize that. But I was going to continue trying to change the world. I'm not giving up on that. I'm still going to try and make sense of this and work out how to make a contribution to a better world. It needed saying. And waiting for the Great Leap Forward was my way of saying, yep, okay, I recognize where we're at and I recognize what it means, but I am not turning back. I'm going to carry on trying in my own way, because Red Wedge was very much a collective effort, as was the Miners' Strike, as was Rock Against Racism and Two Tone and those other movements. But after they dissipated, we were kind of all operating on our own. But I just wanted the audience to know that I remained committed to the ideals that I'd been articulating on earlier records. And then Mid-Century Modern is just a reflection on how I, as a person, and my generation as well, I think, could make a better contribution to the way that society is going. I think there's a tendency among those of us who were out with the miners and supporting gay rights and fought for campaign for nuclear disarmament, anti-apartheid, against Thatcher, to rest on our laurels a bit, which I kind of, or worse than that, to become cynical about the ideas that motivated us when we were young. And that's even sadder, I think. So I'm just trying to let my audience know that we're never going to be as pretty as we were, or as hip as we were even. But there's no reason why we can't be as relevant as we were, or as radical as we were. That doesn't change with age. You can still do that. So yeah, that's the message I'm trying to put across, both politically, but also in my relationships as well. We can always do better. And I think I'm trying to sing from where I am rather than sing about what I was doing when I was in my 20s.
Nora Guthrie is also in A People's History. And when did you become aware of the work of Woody Guthrie, and then how did that develop over the next few years?
I first became aware of Woody when I read a book about Bob Dylan by a geezer named Anthony Scaduto. Now, this must have been about 1972. Oh. And I think it was the first rock biography. And it was really helpful for me because I was getting into Bob Dylan and I didn't have a big brother or sister to help me. And Dylan wasn't really around. He was still in his sort of missing period. So this book really helped me to understand who he was as I was listening to his early records. So I really liked The Times They Are Changing was my go-to record back in those days. And I read in there that he was influenced by this guy, Woody Guthrie. I'd never heard of this guy. Who was he? So I couldn't find any Woody Guthrie records anywhere. No record shops in Barking had a copy. And eventually, in a shop that didn't even sell records, it just sold everything. And it had some cassettes. And among these cassettes was a cassette of Woody Guthrie. And it wasn't even an English one. It was a French one. It was on a label called Chant du Monde, Songs of the World. And it didn't have much in the way of sleeve notes. It even spelled his name wrong. Woodie. But I took it home, and it was basically the Dust Bowl Ballads, and I played it, and it was so raw. I was only 15. I couldn't deal with it. I couldn't hack it. I was like, oh, no, I don't like that. But what I didn't realize was that listening to American singer-songwriters as closely as I did, I kind of learned a lot of his songs by osmosis, because so many of them, Ry Cooder covered Do Re Mi, Vigilante Man, Arlo did Deportees. I knew lots of his songs. So kind of that was how I learned about him. But I didn't know a huge amount about him because you still couldn't buy his records. It wasn't really until I went to the US in 1984 that I was able to walk into a record shop with a Woody Guthrie section and then look at his records and buy what I think is his best recording, which is the double album that he made with Alan Lomax for the Library of Congress, where he sits and talks between the songs. I mean, it's so revelatory. It's just brilliant. And then Joe Klein wrote a biography about him in the 80s, and that allowed me to get a bit more of a handle on him. But I only read that after I met Nora Guthrie, and she started asking me about the project. So yeah, that would have been it was I think 1992 I met Nora, because it was Woody's, was it his 80th birthday? I think it was, yeah, it was his 80th birthday celebrations in Central Park in New York, and Pete Seeger was on the bill, Arlo, me, Judy Collins, I think. And Nora saw me there and started talking to me about these lyrics. And I was like, yeah, isn't this Bob Dylan's job? It's not my, I'm not even from here. And she saw something in me, I think. One, that I had a certain irreverence that her father also had. But I think she also realized that, having not grown up with Woody, I would be able to collaborate with him in a much more open way, that I wouldn't be intimidated by him. I kind of see Woody against the backdrop of American pop culture. He's a figure in the landscape, whereas for someone like Springsteen, he's a colossus. He's William Shakespeare. So I have a bit of maybe a generational distance from Dylan and from Neil Young and other people that Nora spoke to. So I think it was a really smart choice to get me in there to do the job, because she needed someone who was going to challenge the idea of who Woody Guthrie was, not someone who was going to replicate his recordings, someone who was going to, in many ways, reboot him for a new generation. And that was a remit to me and Wilco, and I think we did it pretty well on Mermaid Avenue.
And then the late 90s, having Ian McLagan join
Oh,
your band must have just been amazing.
it was. It was really pretty brilliant working with Mac. Again, being a diehard Faces fan, I met him in Los Angeles when he lived in Los Angeles. A mate of mine, Sid Griffin, put me in touch with him. So that was cool. And I used to bump into his son, Lee, in Sainsbury's in Chiswick, of all places. And he would sort of, Dad says hi, and then he came over and did a bit of recording with me and Wiggy, which was great. And when the Mermaid Avenue tour came together, Wilco couldn't do it because they were into Summerteeth. And my band that I put together didn't get their visas in time. So I used Mac's band, his bump band from Texas. They came out on the road with me for a month. And it was so cool. I couldn't employ the band, but working with Mac was too good to put down. So it was a bit of a commute from Texas to wherever we were playing, but I loved him. My band, the blokes, loved him. And by God, the audiences loved him. They really loved him. And he was that kind of guy. He was Hail Fella Well Met, whoever it was. I remember him talking to two old guys in a dressing room one time about when they'd seen him in 1962 with the Small Faces, and they had a long old chat. And afterwards he said, that wasn't me, those gigs. That was Jimmy before me. I didn't do those shows. And I'm like, yeah, you can't just tell them off, can you? You've got to accept their memory. And that's what he was like. He was just very, very accessible and really totally 100% pro.
And then today, the themes from your song and album, England Half English. You also wrote a book, A Patriot, A Search for Belonging, and also you had a song, Take Down the Union Jack. And the themes of that, I don't know if it's more resonant now, but they can
Yeah.
certainly continue to be resonant.
They continue. I mean, they were resonant back then. That's how I wrote it. I mean, it was a reaction to the rise of the British National Party, of Islamophobia in the wake of 9/11. And I've always felt that the left have failed to make a case for a sense of identity around Englishness. Not a sort of, rah, rah, aren't we great kind of identity, but an identity that says, this is who we are in this space that we share together. Let's make something of it, and let's make our identity accessible to the many different people who live here. This flag I'm sitting in front of at the moment is called the Union Jewel, and it's a kind of alternative to the Union Jack, in that it sort of manifests the diversity of the British identity. that has evolved over the years from the old days of the red, white, and blue when we were more of a monoculture. And I think the recent use of flags, particularly the flag of St. George, has been an effort to promote a monocultural idea of what it means to be English. Anybody who has any sensibility about what England looks like will see how wrong that is. I mean, look at our football teams. You know, it's not a monoculture. It's much more diverse than that. And my patriotism is progressive. And what that means is that I believe in values rather than symbols. Your traditional patriot believes in symbols like the flag and the crown and the army and institutions. But I believe in values, the values that the government promotes at school these days, which are values such as tolerance, compassion, respect for democracy, respect for the views of other people. And also my patriotism is some sort of expressed through the diversity of our country. I love the diversity of our country. So really, my patriotism isn't necessarily a rah-rah patriotism. It only really comes into play when those values, I feel, are being betrayed by the government, by institutions, by society. And I think, you know, anyone who's knows anything about socialism or Christianity knows there's lots of different types of socialism, lots of different types of Christianity. And there are lots of different types of patriotism. Most people's patriotism is they're Christians, like they celebrate Christmas, you know, and Easter. They're not Christians the rest of the time, but they join in. And it's the same, you know, when there's football on or rugby or something, or, you know, Jubilee, they'll wave a flag, but the rest of the time it's something they wear lightly. And I think that's a good thing, to wear it lightly and to let anybody wave the flag, let anybody feel the experience. And equally on the other side of that, and I think this is just as important, if you don't feel it and you don't want to be English and you don't want to have to salute the flag, that you feel that you're something else, a Londoner or whatever, or wherever you come from. You know, identity is a purely personal construct. You are what you think you are. You're not what someone tells you what you are. It's not my job to say to people of colour, if they don't feel English or British, of course you're English, of course you're British. It's what they feel. And no amount of me telling them is going to make any difference to that. And I have to respect that and ask myself, why don't they feel part of my community? Why don't they feel part of this space that we share? Because I believe that if Englishness means anything, and it may actually be nothing, it's an intangible idea, it may not exist. But if it does exist, it has to encapsulate everything that happens within the space called England. The good stuff, the bad stuff, the mediocre stuff, the rainy days, the sunny days. That's who we are and what we are. And we have an opportunity to improve on that. We always have an opportunity to make that a better place. That's something that I believe passionately, and that plays into my politics. And I don't think that just because I love my country doesn't mean I can't be an internationalist, doesn't mean I can't believe in the idea of universal rights. Because I think in a very fundamental sense, the times that we're living in at the moment are seeing a challenge to the idea of universal rights that came into play after 1945, after the war, particularly after the Holocaust. The idea that every individual has fundamental rights that must be respected. That's an absolute key part of rebuilding society. And we believed that, and we signed up to the conventions on human rights. But now we see people starting to say, well, we should come out of the European Convention on Human Rights. We see, you know, the Americans saying, oh, well, we don't sign up to the UN anymore. We don't believe that. And that's really dangerous, because the alternative to universal human rights, the thing that universal human rights was created, and democracy too, was created to deal with, is something that I think is absolutely central to Donald Trump's project. And that is the idea, the maxim, that might is right. That if you're strong enough to do something, you don't need anyone to justify that. You can just do that. You can do what you like to people who are weak. You can do what you like to people who are poor. You can do what you like to people who don't have as much money as you. That, you know, democracy was built in order to level that out so that nobody was above the law. So that fairness is an absolute fundamental across the board. And I think we are coming to a time where we're going to have to choose whether we want to live in a world of universal rights where everybody is respected, or a world where might is right, where, people who have the power, whether it's, and this is why it's really dangerous, it's not just the political power, it's the physical power, because might is right doesn't only happen in the White House, it also happens in your house. Might is right is a fundamental aspect of patriarchy. And we should be pushing against that all times. Your listeners probably know there's an epidemic of violence against women and girls around the world. And that's from men who believe that might is right. So we have to fight this fight with everything we have. We're not just going against the European Convention on Human Rights here. We're going against the idea that just because you're stronger, you can do whatever you like. That's the principle that socialism was built to overcome. And that's why I think the idea of universal human rights must be defended and must be upheld.
We went from a position in the 1990s where it felt that things were constantly going to get better, and now it feels like we're going back to the 1920s almost, and there's a bit of a fork in the road, especially when you've got an economy that, or an economic system that is failing, but we're not looking at rectifying the economic system. We're just blaming.
Exactly.
There is people in charge facilitating that blaming of others because they're an easy target and they want to prop up
exactly to distract. And you are right, things were getting better, and this is why the might is right crowd are here, because they realized that ultimately they would have to cede power to women, to people of color, to people with disabilities, to people of different sexualities and different genders. And they realized that ultimately they would no longer be in charge. And that, I think, is what's driving so much of populism. It's the sense that, is it patriarchy? Is it whiteness? Is it America being afraid of China? It's all these things. Britain being afraid of Europe. I always held that one of the big drivers for Brexit was that feeling among the Conservative Party and their supporters that by being in the European Union, we were somehow being in somebody else's empire and we weren't in charge anymore. And this problem of change, the challenges of diversity, of equality, of China, but ultimately the big change, because all these other ones can be kind of ignored or, fought against, brutalized, abused. But climate change can't be brutalized. Climate change can't be abused. Climate change is coming, whether we want it or not. And so ultimately, we will have to make these changes. We will have to make these changes. I was listening to a political discussion just today in my car, to Americans talking about, what might the Democrats rally around in order to beat Trump. And the Democrat guy said, well, we need a common purpose, and climate change is that common purpose. It can't be avoided. And the guy from the New York Times said, yeah, but we can't do that because it's too partisan. We can't even go there because people won't agree on it. I mean, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. If you go back and look at how civilizations collapse, this is how it happens. Everyone turns inwards and starts fighting against each other and ignoring reality. I read a great book a couple of years ago. It's even on the shelf here, but I can't bloody see the spine. The idea that the Roman Empire, the collapse of the Roman Empire was kind of nudged by changing the climate. These things happen. I think we all saw with the pandemic how fragile our civilization is. And we need to be coming together, all of us, whatever our politics, whatever our color, in all our diversity, to start to take actions to mitigate the way that the planet is changing. Otherwise, we really are going to be in a terrible, terrible situation socially, but also environmentally as well.
Brexit thing typified it in the sense that there's there were side issues like immigration, but ultimately it's a debate about freedom, about whether you want to be on your own, but not with anyone else, but actually not realizing that you're going to have less power as opposed to being part of joining and working with other countries.
You know, if I had to paint something on my guitar like Woody Guthrie had on his guitar, it would be death to cynicism. I fight mine all the time. Sometimes it overwhelms me, and I can't get off from the sofa after match of the day because West Ham have been so shit. But I fight it, and I tune in next week to see if they can get a better result. That might be foolish. Your listeners might be thinking, "You idiot," but that's what I'm talking about. You know, you've got to keep your cynicism on a leash.
So, A People's History, you kind of see the arc of your career in music there. How have things changed? Because I don't know if you're getting off the album treadmill and looking at releasing single releases going forward, you're writing books these days. What's the sort of future looking like for you?
Well, I think I would be making albums so often anyway because I'm no longer in the public eye. I mean, when you're in the first flush of your career, you need an album every year. You need singles, bob, boom, bit of boom, bit of bam. People need that. But, you know, people don't need that now. And in some ways, you know, the audience always, you know, they want to hear New England. They want to hear Levi Stubbs' Tears. And I recognize that. There comes a point in your career when the balance between creation and curation comes to a slightly different balance. And that's what the box set was about. And also, when you're faced with something like Trump, you want to kind of get your hand, you know, come up with something more than just a few verses and a chorus. So writing books makes sense to me, makes me feel more engaged in the process. But I am still writing songs. I am still putting stuff together. But the thing really that has changed is the way that the role that music has in society. In the late 20th century, music had a vanguard role in youth culture. It was the only social medium that we had. If I was angry about the world as a 19-year-old, the only option available to me would be to learn to play guitar, write songs, and do gigs. That was the only way my voice was going to be heard by anyone other than my immediate family and friends. Now, obviously, that's completely changed. If you've got a feeling about the way the world is and want to do something about it, there's so many things you can do. I mean, a podcast is just one of many things. I mean, you can make a film on your bloody iPhone and edit it. So music no longer is the focus of the social discourse among young people. So I think in that sense, there's other ways to approach what I do. And what I actually do for a living is not actually, I'm not really technically a musician. I'll be perfectly honest with you, I'm a guitar player. And just about in that sense, I'm a rhythm guitar player. You know, I know some chords. That's about it. But what I really am, and I think I always have been, is a communicator, which is why I'm happy to talk to your listeners, to get the opportunity to facilitate a platform for me to come and talk about these issues. I'm interested in doing that, to throw in ideas out there, to get a reaction, to hone my thoughts on these particular issues by involving myself in the debate. So in that sense, I carry on doing that. I carry on writing songs, doing gigs, writing books, you know, 1,000 words on a Saturday on Facebook, see what people say about that. You know, I'm just trying to, as I always was, trying to make sense of a crazy world.
Fantastic. Well, certainly if people want to make sense of you, they can read A People's History. Thank you so much, Billy.
My pleasure, Jason. It was lovely talking to you, mate.